You know, folks, my buddy Dan Reel at realworldview.com alerted me to a story in the New York Slimes that I want to alert you to. And this is one of the reasons why I feel we got to get back to the original notion of what the Senate was supposed to be. Listen to this. Senator races to renew ties, if not make a home in Kansas. It's hard to find anyone who's seen Senator Pat Roberts. He's a Republican. He's a moderate. At the red brick house on a golf course that his voter registration lists as his home. Across town at the Inn Pancake House on Wyatt Earp Boulevard, this is Dodge City, by the way, breakfast regulars say the Republican senator is a virtual stranger. He calls it home, said Gerald Miller, a retiree, but I've been here since 1977, and I've only seen him twice. The 77-year-old senator went to Congress in 1981 and became a fixture, a member of the elite Alfalfa Club, the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, which made him a regular on the Sunday talk shows. His wife became a real estate broker in Alexandria, Virginia, the suburb where the couple lives, boasting of her extensive knowledge of the area. But such emblems of Washington status have turned hazardous in a Republican establishment threatened by the Tea Party and unnerved by the defeat of incumbents like Richard Lugar of Indiana, who also, by the way, didn't have a home in Indiana. Mr. Roberts is now desperate to reestablish ties to Kansas and to adjust his politics to fit the rise of the right in the state. You know, this is the Orrin Hatch head fake. Now, Orrin Hatch, to the best of my knowledge, has a house, a residence in Utah, but he lurched to the right, and now look. These efforts, his efforts, underscore the awkward reality of Republicans who, after coming of age in an era of comedy and esteem for long-term service, are trying to remake themselves to be warriors for a Tea Party. Isn't this amazing? To remake themselves, because they've been so good as part of the establishment. What the hell have any of these men and women done to put the brakes on what's going on? Nothing. They're part of the problem. Colin Powell, Pat Roberts, and on and on and on. I'm serious about this. Now, if in fact United States senators were selected by state legislatures, you better believe Pat Roberts would have a home in Kansas. You better believe he'd be working back home with his neighbors, with his community, with his state representatives and state senators. Right now, he's a senator from Washington, D.C. They all are. That's the problem. They use their states to get to Washington, D.C., and that's where they are, that's where they live, that's what they believe in. If Pat Roberts had to rely on his seat in the U.S. Senate, on the state legislature of Kansas, he'd have roots in Kansas, wouldn't he? Yes, he would. Here he is now, trying to pull a Orrin Hatch. Orrin, how did you do this? Well, let me tell you how to play them. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing to me. So, in an interview, the three-term senator acknowledged that he did not have a home of his own in Kansas. The house on a country club golf course that he lists as his voting address belongs to two longtime supporters and donors. And he says he stays with them when he's in the area. He established his voting address there the day before his challenger in the August primary, Milton Wolfe, announced his candidacy last fall, arguing that Mr. Roberts was out of touch with his High Plains roots. By the way, Dr. Milton Wolfe is a good guy. He's a solid conservative, not just in this election, but before this election, which means after this election. So you Republicans, you have a choice in Kansas. I have full access to the recliner, the senator joked. Turning serious, he added, nobody knows the state better than I do. That assertion is disputed by Tea Party activists energized by Mr. Wolfe's candidacy. In 4.5 going on 5 years of existence, have we been contacted by Senator Roberts or any of his staff? Not once, said Chuck Henderson, Tea Party activist in Manhattan, Kansas, who mocked the notion of the senator's official residence here. This is exactly why the framers supported rotation in and out of office. And it was commonly understood. They never believed that you would have professional politicians. A few of them were, the vast majority of them were not. But the power was in the states. So they never thought that they would have to term limit members of Congress. In Washington, D.C., they figured they'd want to come home. They'd want to come home to their private lives and so forth. This really was a public service, not a career for 30, 40 years, which is why I now support term limits and getting us back to the original Senate. These senators do not represent their states. They say they do, but they're so arrogant they don't even have a residence in their own state. And he's not the only one. He's not the only one. They spend more time with consultants in Washington, D.C., with lobbyists in Washington, D.C., the United States Chamber of Crony Capitalism, and the Democrats with their union buddies. They do not get home unless it's an election. This guy, Mark Warner, is running all over Virginia now, which is right next door to Washington, D.C. The vast majority of Virginians never seen this guy, but now he's everywhere. Yes, Mark Warner. Oh, yes, there he is. And then we get we have a guy running for lieutenant governor in the state of Texas. I forget the guy. I think his name is Richardson. Another one of these phony Republicans. Another one of these moderates. I think that's his name. He's not memorable, but he is running. And when the 17th Amendment issue was brought up to him, he basically, what is this, kooks? You don't want to have a direct election of senators? What do you want to go back to? I'm thinking to myself, this is the problem, folks. The superficiality, the self-serving statements. They want the Senate like this, but they pretend that you want the Senate like this. Well, you got to vote, didn't you? You get to vote for your state representative and your state senator, too. And what's crucial here is you have more access to them, and they actually live in your community than these guys. You vote for them, they go off to Washington, and you never hear from them again. You never see them again. Don't get me wrong, you'll get the form letter when you lose your Social Security check. I know that. Or you might bump into them in the halls of Congress. But day in, day out in your neighborhoods and your communities, they're not there. They can't possibly be there, even if they wanted to be there. But you can knock on the door of your state delegate. You can track down your state senator. And for most people, not all, most people, their state capital is closer than the national capital. There's a reason why the framers did this. And look at it. Anyway, so this Pat Roberts doesn't have a... And by the way, if you defeat Pat Roberts, you know, the establishment's going to go nuts. The Karl Rove types. Look at this. We had this seat. We had it in our grasp. And we lost it. Now, the fact that they've lost 100 of them, well... The fact that they lost the last two presidencies and more, well, whatever. Pat Roberts, when I've listened to him speak, he's like a knockoff of Bob Dole. He sounds like Bob Dole. He acts like Bob Dole. I think he tries to be Bob Dole. But he's a well-known moderate Washington Republican, that is D.C., who all of a sudden is a winger just to get elected. Now, what does this also demonstrate? It demonstrates if you want to get elected, you need to be a conservative. Does it not? Particularly from a red state like Kansas. It would be nice. You know, there's no excuse for a guy like this. You're from a conservative Midwestern state. What's the problem? It's like South Dakota. You got Thune, nice enough guy, but you ought to have a conservative. Or North Dakota, which is more conservative than it's ever been now. You got that guy Hoeven. He's the future. Future of what? He's like the jerk Corker from Tennessee. I can go down the whole list. Tennessee, the volunteer state. You should have a conservative senator. You don't have one. You got two knuckleheads. I'm just saying. And by the way, this is why I'm loved in Washington, D.C., and this is why I can't go to a Republican convention. They hate me more than anybody. Because, you see, I'm just supposed to go along and pat them on the head and how wonderful they are and so forth and so on. But they're not. They don't represent you. And it's not a question of expecting them to be everywhere. That's an impossibility. But I do expect them to have what we call a home in the state they're supposed to represent. Otherwise, they can't really represent the state. They need to have an investment in their state. They need to have roots in their state. So when they go to Washington, they're not representing LULAC or the Chamber of Crony Capitalism or some other group or some other people. They're representing the people of Kansas.